Jai Gurudev. Welcome to the new lecture this week under studies in the memories of our Gurudev and the memorial studies series. So after meditation, we will go and bow down in the lotus feet of our Guru Parampara. As usual, we'll start with the invocation of Guru Parampara. Let's come along. Agad sansayam bodhi samutarana taranim Vande vichitra arthapadam chitram tam guru bharatim sada sada anugraha nigraha grihitamuni vigraho bhagavan sarvasamupanissadam durvasa jayati daisikaha pratamaha trambaka vihita santati tamraparani sanmoktik prakara kanti vises bhagaha Purve jayanti guruvo guru sastra sindhu kalalola keli kalanamal karnadhara jayati guru reka eva Sri Sri Kanto Bhuvi Pratitaha Paramurtir Bhagavan Maheswaro Bhuti Rajascha Sri Somananda Bodha Srimat Utpala Vinihasita Jayanti Samvida Amod Sandarva Dikprasarpinaha Tad Aswad Varaves Brahmahitam Mati Satapadim Gurur Lakshmana Guptasya Nada Sammohinim Numaha Sada Abhinava Guptam Yat Puranam Chaprasidhamata Udayam Tat Paro Ullasaya Swayam Asfuraje Nunotaram Avinavarupa Saktiha Tadgupto Yo Maheswaro Devaha Tada Ubhayamala Rupam Avinavaguptam Sivam Bande Yaha Puranananda Visranta Sarvasasrartha Paragaha Sri Chema Rajahaso Drisyadrishtam Me Gururutamaha Sri Vasugupta Mahaguru Somananda Prabhu Utpalayacharyan Avinavaguptam Natham Bande Sri Chema Rajascha Namo Nikhile Maline Vilas Pan Patiyase महामहेश्वराय श्रीरामाय गुरुर्मूर्तये। जय गुरुदेव। नमः कारुण्यदेहाय वीराय शुभदन्तिने भक्तिगम्याय भक्तानां दुःखहर्त्रे ते नमस्तुते ते। यस्य उन्मेषनिमेषाभ्यां जगतः प्रलयोदयः तं शक्तिचक्रविभं प्रभवं शङ्करमस्तु महा। नमः शिवाय सततं पञ्चकृत्यविधायिने चिदानन्दघन स्वात्म परमार्थ अवभासिना आस्यानं चित्रस्योगं साकारत्वमुपागतं जगद्रूपतया वन्दे प्रत्यक्षं भैरवं वपुः। ॐ आनन्द सुन्दर पुरन्दर मुक्तमाल्यं मौलोहटेन निहितं महिषासुरस्य पादाम्बुजं भवतु मे विजयाय मार्जिरसिञ्चित् मनोहरम् अम्बिकाया सहस्रसा पुरुषा पुनातु वः सहस्रचक्षुर्भगवान् सहस्रपाता गले अङ्गी ह्रीणमूले नयने च निश्चला त्रयो अपामि यं पुरुषा उपासते। ॐ सन्नो मित्रः सन्वरुणः शन्नो भवत अर्यमा सन्नो इन्द्रो बृहस्पतिः सन्नो विष्णुरुक्रमः नमो ब्रह्मणे नमस्ते वायु त्वमेव प्रत्यक्षं ब्रह्म असि त्वमेव प्रत्यक्षं ब्रह्म वदिष्यामि प्रीतं वदिष्यामि सत्यं वदिष्यामि तन्मा अवतु तत्त्वाकारम् अवतु अवतु माम् अवतु वक्तारम्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। जय गुरुदेव। हर हर महादेव। I would like to welcome everyone whosoever directly or indirectly associated with this Gyan Yajna in the honor and respect and memory of our beloved Gurudev in this memorial lecture. I'm just sharing, we are in the very first chapter of the great work done by our Gurudev, Acharya Pandit Motilal Ji, the Tantric and philosophical aspect of Kasmir ShavismI. And we are in the very first chapter. So we are in the last part of basically in this chapter and going through the reflections, going through the teachings, what Gurudev has revealed here, slowly under his blessings. So today again, I will take you to the reflections, to the teachings revealed by Gurudev in the very first chapter. So in the last chapter, in the last lecture, we have reached up to this slide, the rise of Shiva, and from here I'm just witnessing what Gurudev has revealed in the very first chapter, early sources of ShavismI. So let's come. In the last slide, in the last lecture, we discussed the rise of Shiva. The rise of Shiva, how Shaivism become one of the most influential tradition within Hinduism, how the Vedic Rudra transformed into the Shiva, that we just witnessed the teachings, the reflections by Gurudev. Now we are moving into a deeper and the more philosophical stage of development, and that is the influence of Upanishad. So here, at this point, which is extremely important, because it makes a major transformation in the Indian religion in general, and in Shaivism in particular. So this transformation is basically a shift from rituals to philosophy, a shift from external sacrifice to inner realization, and from mythology to metaphysics. So the Upanishads fundamentally changed the direction of Indian thought, and Shaivism was deeply influenced by this transformation. So let's come one by one. Basically, let's understand first what's the Upanishad. So these are, Upanishads are philosophical texts that form the concluding part of the Vedas. So it's a Vedanta, Anta Vedanta, basically, because they come in the end of the Vedas. So they are often called Vedanta, the end of Veda. And unlike earlier Vedic texts, which focus heavily on rituals, which focus heavily on sacrifices and priestly ceremonies, Upanishad focus on knowledge. Upanishad focus on consciousness. Upanishad focus on ultimate reality. Upanishad focus on self-realization. So that's the difference. So now the question arising, why might people eventually move from rituals towards philosophy? It may be, the answer may be like search of deeper meaning, or maybe dissatisfaction with the external rituals, or desire for inner spiritual experience, maybe. So this transition is one of the greatest revolutions in Indian intellectual history. How it happens, let's come point-wise. First point, shift to philosophy. So shift to philosophy, early Vedic religion emphasized correct rituals, emphasized on sacrifices, yajnas, and the priestly authority, external religious performances. But the Upanishad is coming and asking for deeper questions. Deeper questions are being asked, like, what is the nature of reality? Like, what is the self? Koham. What happened after death? So this changes the religion itself. And religion is no longer only about performing rituals. It becomes about understanding existence. That is the shift is happening now. So this philosophical term deeply influences Shaivism. So Shiva gradually becomes not only a deity, but also a symbol of absolute consciousness. Gurudev always saying, like, philosophically, Shiva is absolute consciousness. So the internalization of religion is happening here, and it's a very important idea. Earlier, sacred fire existed outside the individual. Now, a spiritual realization happens within the self. It is happening within the self now. So the Upanishad teach the true sacrifice is inner transformation. This changes a spiritual practice. So meditation becomes important now, and asceticism gains value. Self-knowledge becomes central. So now the question arising, like, what is the more important? What is the more important, like external rituals or inner realization? So this question becomes central to the latter Indian philosophy. We will go together in search of the answer of this question. The second point, like concept of ultimate reality. Now the Upanishad introduce the idea of Brahma. Brahma means absolute reality, infinite consciousness, and the source of everything. At the same time, they discuss Atma. So one of the greatest Upanishadic teachings is Atma is Brahma. So it means the deepest self is identical with the ultimate reality. So the idea profoundly influenced Shaivism. Later Shaiva philosophy identifies Shiva with the god among gods, Mahadev, but the ultimate principle of existence. Gurudev always giving the differentiation, the concept, the Vedantic concept of Brahman and the Trika concept of Shiva, how it differs. Like our Shiva is a dynamic and the Brahma Vedanta is aesthetic. Brahma Vedanta is inert, but Shiva is Pancha Kriti Vidhaini, is saying. So that we also always keeping in our mind. But here we are just discussing the Upanishadic influence. So the philosophical transformation of Shiva is happening. Earlier, Rudra represent destructive natural powers. Now, Shiva becomes a cosmic consciousness. So it's all about a study of consciousness, basically. So this is a major philosophical transformation. Shiva now understood as infinite awareness. Shiva now understood as eternal reality. Shiva now understood as source of creation and destruction. And Shiva now understood as supreme self. So here in Shaivism, basically we are involved into the understanding the manifestation, unmeshan, imeshan. So this elevates Shaivism from mythology to metaphysics. This is the transformation. Now the third point, the inner spiritual focus. So the Upanishad emphasizes on meditation. Upanishad emphasizes on self-realization. Upanishad emphasizes on detachment. Upanishad emphasizes on knowledge. And this strongly support yoga traditions, asceticism, and mysticism. So Shiva becomes deeply connected with these ideals. He is no longer simply a storm deity, a tribal god, a destructive force. He becomes the ideal yogi, the Adi yogi, and the supreme consciousness, the absolute consciousness. So this is why Shiva becomes associated with, when we connect Shiva, connect with asceticism. So it is, Shiva is connected with the mountains, Kailaspati. Shiva is connected with meditation. Shiva is connected with silence, and Shiva is connected with renunciation. So esoteric traditions becomes increasingly respected in Indian civilization. So we need to understand, like, why would renunciation become spiritually important? Maybe freedom from attachment is a path, search for truth, and escape from the suffering. So these themes later becomes central to yoga, central to Vedanta, central to Shaivism, and central to Buddhism. Now discussing the fourth point under the Upanishadic influence, non-dualism, Advaita. Upanishad increasingly move towards unity of existence. Reality is ultimate. Reality is ultimately one, infinite, and beyond divisions, akhanda. So this deeply influences later transcendent and immanent. So it means it is beyond the universe and Viswuttarm at the same time. So this is the one of the most sophisticated ideas in the Indian philosophical history. Now trying to understand the philosophical significance, how Gurudev is giving reflection here. Upanishads transform religion by teaching. Liberation becomes through knowledge, not merely through rituals. So some reflection is going towards the Prativigya. So this changes the meaning of a spirituality itself. Shaivism absorbs this deeply. Shiva becomes consciousness. Liberation becomes realization of unity, and a spiritual practice becomes inward, internalized. Thus, Shaivism evolved. It evolves into a profound metaphysical system. So now we are able to conclude here, like the Upanishads shift Indian religion from the ritual to philosophy, introduce Brahma and Atman, and emphasizes towards the inner realization. It influences the yoga, the asceticism, and non-dual, and transforms Shiva into a metaphysical principle. So I'm concluding with this thought. The Upanishadic influence elevates Shaivism from ritual religion into one of the deepest philosophical traditions in Indian thought. Now I'm taking you to the next concept. So here we will study the concept of Brahma in a greater detail, and understand how Shiva becomes identified with the ultimate reality itself. So in the previous slide, we have just discussed the Upanishadic influence of Upanishadic transformation of Indian thought, from ritual to philosophy, from external sacrifice to inner realization, and from mythology to metaphysics. Now we move to one of the most profound idea in the Indian philosophy, that the Brahma. And this idea is central not only to Vedanta but also to later Shaivism, because Shiva gradually becomes identified with the Brahma, Chaitanya Matam. So the ultimate reality itself. So let's try to discuss here. So what does the word Brahma mean basically? So in Upanishad, Brahma refers the ultimate reality, the infinite existence, the absolute consciousness, the source of universe, even source of everything. So Brahma is not a person in an ordinary sense, not a limited deity, and not a physical object. Instead, Brahma is underlying reality behind everything. So we try to understand what lies behind the changing world we experience. What is the permanent principle of the every temporary thing? So Indian philosophers, our rishis, our gurus, believed there must be one ultimate principle. There must be one ultimate principle. There must be one eternal reality, and there must be one source of existence, and that is Brahma. So let's discuss one by one. The first point on the slide here, it's like a absolute reality. Absolute reality. So Brahma as absolute reality. So everything in the world changes. People age, civilization rise and fall, nature changes constantly. But philosophers, gurus, they asked, is there something eternal behind all change? The Upanishad answers here, yes, the Brahma. So Brahma is eternal, Brahma is infinite, Brahma is unchanging, beyond time and space. So this is extremely important philosophically. The world appears divided and changing, but behind it exists one permanent reality. And this idea deeply influences Shaivism, because Shiva later becomes identified with the eternal cosmic principle. So can we think like, can something temporary produce permanent truth? That is the question. So this question troubled ancient philosophers. Can something temporary produce permanent truth? And Upanishadic thinkers concluded that temporary things cannot be ultimately a reality, cannot be ultimate reality. Therefore, reality itself must be eternal. And the search of permanent leads to Brahma. This also changes religion. Religion is no longer only about worship. It becomes a search. It becomes a search for ultimate reality. So with this thought, let's come to the second point, beyond form. So Brahma is beyond form, Nirakar. The Upanishads often describe Brahma negatively, the Neti. Shaivism is a religion of affirmation, as Guruji is saying always. and this Vedanta is coming with a neti negation. Not this, not that. If we go in a Nirvana Satkam of Adi Shankar. So beyond all categories, so this is called neti, not this, not this. And why? Because ultimate reality cannot be fully described in human language. So can infinite reality be completely expressed through words? That is also a problem. Probably not. Thus, Brahma is formless, Brahma is infinite, and Brahma is beyond limitation. So this creates an important philosophical challenge. If Brahma is beyond form, why worship God with forms? So now we are checking connection with Shiva. This is where Shaivism develops creatively. Shaivism teaches Shiva can be both. Shiva can be formless, absolute reality, or personal deity with forms. So the Shiva becomes both transcendent and immanent. So as Brahm, Shiva is infinite consciousness. As a deity, Shiva becomes approachable for devotion. That is the beauty of Shaivism. And this allows Shaivism to combine philosophy, rituals, devotion, and mysticism. Now, coming to the third point, unity of existence. Upanishads teach all existence comes from one reality. Everything is coming from one reality. There is one source. And separation is ultimately illusion. This leads to non-dualism, Advait. So Shaivism later develops this idea deeply. In non-dual Shiva philosophy, in our Tantric philosophy, Kasmir Shaivism philosophy, the universe is a manifestation of Shiva, and everything exists within divine consciousness, nothing outside consciousness. And Shiva is absolute consciousness. Thus, everything, humans, nature, cosmos, all participate in ultimate reality. Here we have to check the connection with Shakti also. So Shiva as a Brahma represents the difference we have already discussed. The Shiva, the pure consciousness. And now Shakti is coming, and Shakti is representing dynamic energy. And together, the consciousness, the absolute consciousness, and the energy, the divine energy, the absolute plus the manifestation, transcendence plus the creation, and it becomes central in Tantra. It becomes central in Kasmir Shaivism. It becomes central in non-dual Shaiva philosophy. So we need to remember this reflection in the very first chapter GuruDev has just given. And the fourth point, influences on Shaivism. So it has broader impact. The Brahma concept, the Brahman concept, transforms Shaivism from mythological religion to philosophical spirituality. Shiva is no longer merely a tribal god now, a storm deity or an esoteric yogi, but Shiva becomes infinite consciousness. Shiva becomes cosmic reality. Shiva becomes supreme principle. This philosophical elevation allows Shaivism to develop sophisticated metaphysics, to develop mysticism and the yoga systems and Tantric philosophy. So now, in many traditions, God remains separate from the creation. But in Indian philosophy, ultimate reality pervades everything. So the Shiva is beyond the universe, yet present within the universe. This is one of the reasons Indian philosophy becomes highly metaphysical in general and Shaivism in particular. So now I'm concluding here. Brahman means ultimate reality and the eternal, infinite, beyond form, source of all existence. Shiva becomes identified with the Brahman, subject to the differences in the philosophical parameters. And Shaivism evolved into a profound philosophical tradition. I'm concluding this slide with this thought. The concept of Brahman transforms Shiva from a powerful deity into an ultimate metaphysical principle underlying all existence. Let's come to the next together. The yoga origins. That's the reflection in the very first chapter. So here we will examine together the origin of yoga. Shiva is the Adi Yogi. So we are going to examine origin of yoga and understand how yogic traditions becomes deeply connected with the Shiva and Shaivism. So in the previous discussion, previous slide, we discussed the concept of Brahman, and we saw how Shiva gradually becomes identified with the ultimate reality and cosmic consciousness. Now we are moving to one of the major dimensions of Shaivism, the origin of Shiva. So here this point is very extremely important, because yoga becomes one of the central spiritual foundations of Shaivism. Shiva is eventually regarded as the supreme yogi, Mahayogi, Adi Yogi. We know the first teacher, the Adi Guru. So the embodiment of meditation and the spiritual discipline, that is Shiva. But before understanding Shiva as yogi, we must first understand how yoga itself developed historically and philosophically. So let's come together. First, let us ask question to yourself. What does the yoga mean? The yoga, the literal meaning, the yus dhatu is there in Sanskrit. It means to join. It means to unite. It means to yoke together. So spiritually, yoga refers to union. So union of individual consciousness with ultimate reality, universal consciousness. So now yoga here in Shaivism, individual consciousness plus universal consciousness. So yoga is not only physical exercise here. In ancient Indian tradition, yoga includes meditation, breath control, mental discipline, ethical restraint, and a spiritual connection. We have Patanjali system yoga, Ashtanga yoga. In Shaivism, we got the sixth one. But no need to first two. So we need to ask question: why do modern people often misunderstand yoga? Basically, only keeping yoga at a physical level only. It's reduced to a physical posture only, and just like a physical exercise. But historically, yoga is a spiritual practice, and primarily it is a spiritual discipline, basically. So let us contemplate one by one, point wise. So first point, ancient meditative practices. So the origin of yoga are extremely ancient. Some scholars trace early yogic tradition back to prehistoric practices, tribal asceticism, Indus Valley civilization, and the famous Pasupati seal. Gurudev talked about that one. The Pasupati seal is also discussed because you can see the deity is seated in a yogic position, the seated figure, possibly in a meditative posture, might be in a meditative posture and surrounded by animal. So that is the evidence. So some scholars interpret this as a evidence of early yogic practices. However, this interpretation remains debatable. A lot of debates are going on because there is no strong evidence. Because the Indus script, basically the Indus script is a problem. We are not able to fully understand the Indus script right now. So we cannot prove it with full clarity. But there is some indication is coming. So the image suggests the bodily discipline at least. At least it suggests the meditation, and at least it suggests the spiritual concentration. So this may represent early forms of yogic practice. There is no doubt about it. So why meditation emerges? That is the question. So, why would meditation emerge in the ancient society? Let's think for a minute and find possible answer, like maybe search of inner peace, maybe desire to overcome fear, maybe a spiritual curiosity, or maybe need for self-control. Ancient ascetics believed the mind itself is the source of suffering and liberation. When that is being revealed by Sri Krishna also in Gita, Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So, thus, the yoga develops as a method for controlling senses, as a method for calming the mind, as a method for achieving the spiritual awareness. This becomes central later in our ＳhaIVISM. So, second point, control of mind and body. So, one of the central goal of yoga is self-mastery. In ordinary life, humans are controlled by desires, Visaya Sukha, and emotion creates suffering, and mind remains restless. Yoga teaches freedom comes through discipline. It includes physical discipline, mental concentration, and breath regulation, meditation. So if I ask question like why is self-control important in a spirituality, we need to contemplate on this. It may be because a spiritual realization requires stability. A spiritual realization requires awareness, immerse. A spiritual realization requires detachment from distraction, vairagya. So we can see here like there is a connection with the asceticism also. Yoga becomes deeply connected with the renunciation, deeply connected with the asceticism, deeply connected with the meditation tradition. So many yogis withdrew from society to live in forests, practice austerities, and seek liberation. Later, ＳhaIVISM. In ＳhaIVISM, Shiva later becomes the ideal symbol of this lifestyle. He is shown sitting in meditation, detached from the worldly desires, and living in mountains and wilderness. Thus, yoga and Shiva becomes inseparable. You cannot separate yoga from the Shiva. Shiva is the Adi Yogi. Shiva is the Mahayogi. Now come to the third point, the spiritual discipline. So yoga is a spiritual discipline. Now we are at this stage. We accept this one. It's not only a physical exercise. Yoga is a spiritual discipline. Yoga is not merely relaxation. It is a transformative spiritual practice. And the goal is moksha, liberation, siva-vilaya, and realization of ultimate reality and the freedom from the ignorance. That is the goal of yoga. So Indian philosophy teaches that suffering comes from ignorance, suffering comes from attachment, suffering comes from ego, and yoga seeks to overcome these limitations. So thus yoga becomes a path to liberation, and this deeply influences Shaivism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Vedanta also. So now we are checking the connection with the Shaivism. Yoga's connection with Shiva. Shiva becomes Lord of Yoga, Master of meditation, source of spiritual knowledge. And in many traditions, Shiva teaches yoga to sages. We have a lot of stories, mythological stories. Shiva reveals mystic wisdom. Vigyan Bharatantra is there. Shiva embodies perfect self-control. So Shiva represents the highest state of consciousness. This is why Shaivism strongly emphasizes meditation, asceticism, and inner transformation. Now we go some more deeper. Yoga changes religion itself. Earlier religion focused mainly on rituals, sacrifice, external works. Yoga is coming into the play. And now yoga emphasizes inner transformation. And this shifts spirituality inward. Liberation now depends not only on priests or rituals, but on personal discipline, meditation, and direct experience. So this changes, yoga changes the externalization of the spirituality to internalization. Now, yoga and non-dualism. Later Shiva traditions, especially Tantra, integrates yoga with non-dual philosophy, consciousness studies, and mystical experiences. Yoga becomes a method of realization, a method of realizing unity with Shiva. Thus, yoga evolves from physical discipline to metaphysical realization. So the final conclusion, I'm concluding carefully this slide. Like yoga has ancient roots, connected with the meditation and discipline, focus on control of mind and body, and becomes central to the ascetic tradition, deeply influences Shaivism. I'm concluding this slide with the thought: yoga transforms spirituality from external rituals to inner realization, and Shiva becomes the supreme symbol of a spiritual discipline. Now, with this thought, we are just moving next. Shiva as yogi. Shiva as yogi. So here we will examine together, we will work together and understand Shiva, especially as a supreme yogi and understand why he becomes the ultimate symbol of meditation, why it becomes the ultimate symbol of renunciation, and why it becomes the ultimate symbol of spiritual mastery. So let's come together and examine Shiva as a yogi, the supreme yogi. So in the previous slide, we discussed the origin of yoga and examined how meditation, asceticism, and a spiritual discipline become central to Indian religious thought. Now we are moving next step further. The most iconic and the spiritually powerful image in all Sanatan Parampara in general and in ShavismI in particular, Shiva as a supreme yogi, Shiva as a Adi yogi. So this image is extremely important because it combines philosophy, asceticism, meditation, mysticism, and liberation. Shiva as yogi becomes the ultimate symbol of a spiritual mastery and inner transcendence. So now we try to understand why Shiva called the Mahayogi or Adi Yogi, because Shiva represents perfect meditation. Shiva represents total self-control. Shiva represents freedom from attachment, and Shiva represents inner stillness. Unlike kings or warrior gods associated with the power, wealth, social order, Shiva chooses mountains, silence, meditation, renunciation, and this immediately makes him different from many other deities. So, why would a supreme deity, Mahadev, god of the gods, rejects worldly power and luxury? This question leads directly into the Indian spiritual philosophy, if you contemplate. So the first point is supreme ascetic. Shiva as a supreme ascetic. Asceticism means renunciation of worldly attachment, discipline of body and mind, a spiritual focus. So Shiva often depicted covered in ashes, the bhasma, seated in meditation, wearing simple clothing or animal skins, living in mountains or cremation grounds. So these symbols are deeply meaningful, as symbolizes impermanence. Bhasma symbolizes impermanence, and everything material eventually turn into ash, whether it is wealth, whether it is power, whether it is physical beauty, and whether it is human life itself. Thus Shiva teaches a spiritual truth is more important than material attachment. Now, philosophical meaning of renunciation, if we are contemplating on that one, then we need to ask a question: why does Indian spirituality value renunciation so highly? It is because attachment creates desire, it creates fear, it creates suffering, and it creates ego. And asceticism aims to overcome these limitations. So Shiva represents freedom. It represents freedom from the worldly bondage. But emphasize carefully, renunciation does not necessarily mean rejecting life completely. Rather, It means freedom from attachment and ego. This is very important philosophical distinction that has to be underlined. Now the second point. Second point is the master of meditation, Mahadhyani. Shiva as a master of meditation. Shiva as a master of meditation. Shiva is usually shown sitting calmly, eyes half closed, and completely absorbed in meditation. So this posture symbolizes inner stillness, concentration, awareness, and the cosmic consciousness. So meditation in Indian philosophy is not merely relaxation. It is a method. It is a method of transforming consciousness. Through meditation, the restless mind becomes calm. Ego dissolves. A spiritual realization becomes possible. So Shiva therefore represents perfect meditative awareness. So the meditation and the cosmic consciousness, we need to understand Shiva's meditation symbolizes unity with the ultimate reality. He is not meditating on something external. Rather, Shiva himself is pure consciousness. Thus, Shiva becomes both the meditator and the object of meditation, and means of meditation also. So, this is one reason Shiva philosophy becomes highly mystical. That is the reason. Third point, detachment from worldly life. Detachment from the worldly life. Now, Shiva detachment from the worldly society. Shiva lives in mountains, forests, cremation grounds. These places symbolize isolation. These places symbolize freedom from society. These places symbolize a spiritual transcendence. So we need to understand why are mountains and forests often associated with their spirituality. Maybe because it indicates silence, indicates simplicity, indicate distance from the distractions. So in Indian thought, a spiritual truth is often discovered outside ordinary social life. The Shiva represents inner freedom. Shiva represents independence from materialism. Shiva represents liberation from social conditioning. Now, try to understand the paradox of Shiva at this stage. Because Shiva is both. Shiva is ascetic and Shiva is householder. He is the Vairagi and he is the Grihast. Two opposites at the same time. Although he renounces the world, he also marries Parvati. He has children and participates in cosmic life. This creates an important philosophical message. And that message is spirituality does not always require abandoning existence. Gurudev also giving a lot of examples. In our Guru Parampara, lots of gurus are householders. So Shiva balances renunciation and participation. Shiva balances silence and action. Shiva balances detachment and compassion. So this balance makes Shiva universally relatable. That is the beauty of Shaivism and beauty of Shiva. Now the fourth point, symbol of a spiritual discipline. Symbol of a spiritual discipline, Shiva as a symbol of a spiritual discipline. Shiva represents self-control. It represents inner mastery, concentration, and liberation. In many traditions, Shiva teaches yoga to sages, reveals a spiritual knowledge, guides seekers towards liberation. A lot of Puranic stories, mythological stories we have. These are the spiritual iconographies. So Shiva becomes the ideal spiritual teacher. We need to understand here why discipline important for their spiritual growth. Because without discipline, the mind remains unstable, desire dominates, awareness becomes clouded. So Shiva therefore symbolizes mastery over self. And now move to the deeper philosophical meaning, Shiva and liberation, basically. So liberation means freedom from ignorance here, freedom from suffering, and freedom from ego and attachment. Shiva represents liberated state itself. This is why meditating on Shiva becomes spiritually important in Shaiva tradition. And if we compare with the other religious ideals, now like many religion emphasizes on obedience, worship, and moral laws, but Indian yogic tradition emphasizes on direct realization through inner experience. Shiva becomes not merely a god of worship, but an ideal state of consciousness to realize. This makes Shaivism deeply experiential and mystical. Now, very carefully, I am concluding this slide. Shiva is the supreme yogi, Adi Yogi, represents meditation and renunciation, symbolizes self-control and spiritual mastery, and balances asceticism and cosmic participation, embodies liberation and ultimate consciousness. So I'm concluding this slide with the thought, Shiva as yogi represents the highest ideal of Indian spirituality, mastery over the self and realization of ultimate reality. So now we are transiting to the closing of this great chapter. Closing of this chapter, and at this point, we can see the complete evolution of this chapter, how from the prehistoric symbolism to Vedic Rudra, then Gurudev revealed the tribal integration, and then he take us to the philosophical transformation, where Shiva becomes supreme yogi and the cosmic consciousness. So this completes the foundation. This completes the foundational development of early Shaivism, and this is for today's lecture. So let's close this one with the Bhairavastava. So let's come. अथा भैरवस्तवः व्याप्त चराचर भाव विशेषम चिन्मयमेकमनन्तमनादिं भैरवनाथमनाथ शरण्यं तन्मयचित्ततया हृदयवन्दे तन्मयमेतदशेषमिदानीं भाति मम त्वमनुग्रहशक्त्या त्वं च महेश सदैव ममात्मा स्वात्मयं मम तेन समस्तम् स्वात्मनि विश्वगते त्वयि नाथे तेन न संसृतिभीति कथास्ति सतस्वपि दुर्धर दुःख विमोह विद्याय सुकर्म गणेशि अंतक मां प्रतिमा दृश्यमेना क्रोध कराल तमा विनिधि शंकर सेवन चिंतन धीरो भीषण भैरव शक्तिमयोस्मि इतस्मुपोदव भवमय संधि धारित भूरित मिश्र मृत्युयमान्तक कर्म पिशाचर नाथ नमस्तु न जातु बिभेमि प्रोषित सत्य विबोध मरीचि प्रोषित विश्व पदार्थ सतत्व भाव परामृत निर्भर पूरणे हमात्मनि निर्मिति मेमि मानस गोचरमेति यदैव क्लेश दशात्यनुताप विधात्री नाथ तदैव मम त्वयि भेद स्तोत्र परामृत रुदेति शंकर सत्यमिदं व्रतदान स्नान तपो भव ताप विदारी आपक शास्त्र परामृत चिंता यस्यन्ति चेसी निर्मिति धारा नृत्यति गायति हृष्यति गाढं संविधियं मम भैरवनाथ त्वां प्रियमाप्य सुदर्शनमेकं दुर्लभमन्यजनैः समज्ञम् वसुरूपस्य कृष्ण दशाम्याम् अभिनवगुप्तः स्तवं निं करो येन विबुध भवमरुसन्तापं शमयति झटयति जनस्य दयालुः इति भारवस्तवः। जय गुरुदेव। So thank you very much for closing this meeting. Thank you for joining in. Jai Gurudev.